to go through a real-world example of a Scrum board in JIRA, or what a lot of people refer to as well as an Agile board or a JIRA board, because it's here in JIRA, all right? But before I get into the details of this example and what it is, I want to talk to you a little bit about the project that is represented in what you're seeing on screen and what we're going to be covering in this real-world example of how we're using JIRA in one of our projects. All right, so I'm just going to go here a second to Microsoft Whiteboard just to illustrate what this project is about. All right, so this project is called Stash. Okay, it doesn't stand for anything in particular. It's just the name that we've given to the project, and basically specifically to the product that we're going to go through in this real world example. And Stash, all you need to know about Stash is that it's a software for researchers. So the users of this system, right, the people that are using Stash are researchers, okay? So they're researchers that work for a university, right? So they're university researchers, okay? And basically they use Stash to manage what we call research data management plans, okay? Or RDMPs. All right. Obviously, this is not something that you need to learn from memory or that I expect you to learn from memory. I'm just giving you a bit of context too, so you understand the project that is covered in this real-world example in JIRA, all right? So Stash, like I said, is the name of the project, right? So this is a project, right? And we are managing this project and everything we're doing in the project directly in JIRA. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about it, because it's a really good example of how you manage real-world, real-life projects directly in JIRA. And of course, this is an Agile project, and we're using Scrum to manage this project. Obviously, we also have a team of people running this. We have 2 developers working on this. So 1 business analyst, 1 BA, we have 1 PM, and there's 1 manager working with us on this project as well. All right. So this is more a bit like the team. All right. And I'm talking about the core team here, of course, because there are more people working on this behind the scenes, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved as well. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of context before we get into the detail of the example and how it looks in JIRA and how we're running the project, etc. I just wanted you to know a little bit about the project, and I'm not going to go into all the details of Stash, but basically, like I said before, all you need to know is that it's a research data management plan system that allows researchers to manage their RDMPs. And why do researchers need to manage their RDMPs? Well, basically, every time they're doing their research, right, when there's a researcher doing any type of researcher, most, if not all of the times, they're working with some type of data, right? And that can be images, that can be numbers, that can be audio, that can be PDFs, Word documents, interviews. It can be a gazillion different things depending on the type of research that they're doing, whether it's in sciences, whether it's in engineering, whether it's biomedical, medical, social sciences, humanities. It doesn't really matter. Like, regardless of which field they're doing their research in, they most likely, most of the time, if not all of the time, are going to have some type and some form of data. And Stash is the system that basically allows them to manage that data, right? And that can be archiving it, publishing it, sharing it, storing it, etc. All right. So Stash is a big system, and it's something that we've developed using different technologies. And now we're at a stage where we're continuously improving and enhancing the product, right? So Stash here is not only a project, it is also a product, or what a lot of you would know as software. Okay. So this is basically what Stash is, right? It's just a system, a product, an application that we use to manage RDMPs and that researchers themselves use to manage their own RDMPs and share it with the world, with colleagues, with other people within the university. All right. So now that I've given you a bit of background on Stash, and like I said before, I don't want to go into a lot of details, but feel free to, message me on text me or send me a message if you have any questions about the project and the example that I'm giving. But like I said before, obviously this is quite a complex and huge project within the university, and I'm not going to go into all the details of that right now because I just wanted you to have a very high level overview of what it is that we're doing. Like I said before, basically what we're doing is we're adding new features to this. So all the time we're adding new features, right? We're doing integration with other systems and other applications, so integrations. All right, and other things that we're doing are just general improvements and enhancements. All right. And that's basically what we're doing with this project. We're adding new features, so every time we talk to our researchers, they might give us ideas, for new things that they want added. So they might give us ideas or suggestions, just basically new things that they want, basically needs that they have that we need to meet with the system. So that's why it ends up translating into us adding new features over here. And obviously, because there are other systems and other applications that researchers use, we also integrate with them to make their lives easier. And obviously, we're also making constantly improvements and enhancements to the system because we want to make sure that they have the best product they can have to make their job easier so that they can have an excellent research project. Research data management plans are quite important for things that we refer to as research excellence. So research excellence and also data integrity. Data integrity and other things such as ethics. All right. So these three things are quite important for people when they're working with research, right? They want to make sure that they have the best practices and principles when they're doing their research projects. We want to have integrity of the data. So we want to make sure that the data is protected, that is stored properly, that it can be replicated, etc., that is compliant with a bunch of different things that needs to be compliant with. And then on the ethics aspect as well, if it's private and it's sensitive data, we want to make sure that we're managing that properly and appropriately. All right. So this is, like I said, a very high level overview of Stash as a product and what we're doing with this project. All right. So everything that we are doing with this project and in this real world example, we are basically managing the project with fortnightly sprints, right? So our sprints are 2-week sprints, right? Fortnightly. And every month we're doing demo sessions for the board, and we're showing different stakeholders our progress. We're doing every fortnight also demos before the monthly board meeting. So with our product owner, we're showing them our progress before we go to the monthly board meeting. And we are doing our daily stand-ups. We're doing our, fortnightly sprint planning, fortnightly backlog grooming, and all of that is reflected in JIRA. Everything that I'm talking about in terms of what we're doing with the project and how we're running the project and what everybody in this team is working on is reflected in JIRA. And that's why I chose this example, because it's a huge project. It's quite complex, but we're actually making it very easy by managing this directly in JIRA. All right, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to jump back now to JIRA to show you specifically what we're doing. And I don't want to get too much into the details of the what per se, because that's not probably super important. What I'm trying to show you is how we're using JIRA to run the project, all right? And for you to get a better understanding on how you can use JIRA in your own projects, because this it doesn't matter that this is an example of stash. Regardless of which product or project you're running, the things that I'm going to show you here are the same type of things that you're going to be needing and doing when you're running your own project. All right. So right now, I just want to highlight here for you quickly that we're on the Active Sprint tab on the left-hand side menu. And that basically is showing you your board, your Scrum board, right? And as you will notice in this board, you can see at the top, the sprint that we're in, right? So we're basically in sprint 3. It's like I said, it's a 2-week sprint. So from February 18th to the 28th of February. And below that, you can actually see the structure of your Agile board or your Scrum board, which typically has 3 columns: to do, in progress, or doing, and done. Okay? But JIRA, like I've said many times before, is quite powerful. It's something that you can customize to your own needs. So you can actually rename this if you wanted to rename the title of the column. You could actually add more columns if you wanted to. And there's a bunch of other things that you can do. So before I go through the different examples in this board, if you wanted to configure or customize the board, you can go here do you see here at the top right-hand side corner, there's a board button. If you click on that and then you go to configure, it's going to show you here the configuration menu. And here on the left-hand side, you'll see the different options that you have for the configuration menu, such as the card colors, the card layout, estimation, working days, etc. Right? And if you were doing here in the column, like I said before, to do, in progress, and done, you could actually rename this if you wanted to. If you see this little pencil, it basically allows you to edit this if you wanted to. You could also move the columns around by dragging and dropping if you wanted to as well. And you could even delete them if you wanted to. So like I said, JIRA, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons why people love JIRA and why JIRA is so powerful, because it is very customizable. It is very easy to change things in JIRA, or to reorganize them, or to rename them, or to change the colors. And it just gives you a lot of flexibility, okay? So a lot of this is very intuitive and self-explanatory, and you could change it, do things with this yourself if you wanted to play with it in your own projects. But in this example, as you can see, we kept it simple, the Agile way, and we just kept to do, in progress, and done. And I'm just going to go back to the board by clicking on this button, back to the board. So we go back to the Scrum board. And then here you can see the columns, right? But if I scroll down, you're seeing here Mike. So Michael Lynch is one of the developers working on the project. And if we went down, you would see Moises, who is one of the other developers working on the project. So this is something that we've actually set up in the board as well. We've actually set up, if I go here again to the board and to configure, if we went here to the swim lanes, which is basically the horizontal view of the board that we're seeing, we've actually said, show us the swim lanes by assignees. So show us the swim lanes by people that are working on stuff, right? This is the assignees, right? But you could change that if you wanted to. As you can see, it gives you different options, or you can even remove the swim lanes so you're not seeing the different user stories by developer or by person that's working on them, but you could just see all of them together without having that division that we were seeing before, where you saw Mike's name at the top and then Moises' name at the bottom. All right. But let me just go back to that example, real world example, like I said. And all of these things that you're seeing here in our board are obviously user stories. And I know what you're thinking. You might be thinking right now, why aren't the user stories in the structure or the traditional structure of a user story, which is as a blah, I need to blah, so that blah, right? Which is, as a is basically the who, I need to blah is the what, and so that blah is the why, right? So generally a user story has that structure because we're trying to clearly state and defining the user story itself, what it is that we're doing, who's doing it, and why we're doing it. What's the value of doing it, right? Because a lot of the Agile teams might be very mature with the Agile methodology, like this project team and this team in this example, we're not using that long structure because it takes a lot longer to write as I need to, so that for every single user story. And in addition to that, it might look a bit redundant. So even though Agile and Scrum theory tell us that when we're writing a user story, we should be using that structure, what you're going to see in practice is that most people and a lot of people don't actually use that structure. And they use their user stories more to represent the different things that they're working on, the tasks or the requirements, right? So I guess if you were going to strictly by the book and strictly by the theory, user stories are basically representing requirements for your customer, from your customers or your clients or your end users. But in practice and in practical applications and in the real world, you're going to be seeing that in the Scrum boards and in the Agile boards and in this JIRA board here that we're seeing right now, most people are going to be using it to track their user stories. But when we're writing user stories, people are generally adding basically tasks and requirements, right? So I just wanted to just make a little note about that so you're aware of that and so that it doesn't come as a surprise when you're seeing this on screen, why it doesn't have the traditional user story structure. But basically, if you look at this little icon here, this green little icon here next to the user story, it's basically telling you that it's a story, that it's a user story. In JIRA, they use the name story, just I guess an abbreviation of the longer name user story. But when they say story in JIRA, they're basically referring to a user story, which I just explained. And this little blue icon here is a subtask that is part of this user story or this bigger task, right? So in JIRA, you can also add subtasks to each user story, okay? And of course, you could also add tasks and not call them user stories if you didn't want to. You can actually call them tasks if that's easier for you. If you don't want to use the user story or story terminology, that's fine. I always say to people, do whatever works best for you, for your team, and in your context, because we got to keep in mind that even though there's a theory, we need to be pragmatic, and a lot of times practice varies a bit from theory. Okay, so I guess don't get too concerned with that and don't overthink it. What I would recommend is you generally use the stories and then subtasks if you need to add to them. And like I said here, you can see very quickly at a glance, and this is the power of a JIRA board right here, right now. You can see what is the status of Mike and what he's working on in this particular sprint. And let's go back and just remind ourselves that we're looking at sprint 3, okay? So we were already gone through sprint 1, sprint 2, and we're now in sprint 3. And as you can see, Mike here, he has finished all of the tasks, all of the user stories that are here on the right-hand side. All of these are things that he already finished, which is a ton of work. So he's done a ton of work in this sprint. And these are 3 things that he's currently working on. And these are things that he needs to work on. Because, and this is another really cool thing, if you go here to the top right-hand side corner, it says 0 days remaining. It means that we're pretty much run out of time in this sprint. So Mike will probably not be able to finish, well, he pretty much didn't finish by now, these 3 subtasks and this user story that he has here, okay? So that's the other thing I want you to keep in mind with JIRA. If you're ever unsure about what something means or you're not too sure about what something represents, an icon, a link, a name or something, just remember that you can hover over it and it will generally give you some information. For example, here, this little red arrow, if I hover over it, it means it's a should. So it's a user story that we mark as a should. And for those that are not too familiar with this, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail right now, but one of the ways in which you can prioritize user stories is by using what we call must-go. All right, so let me just very quickly go through that concept for you guys that have never perhaps heard of must-go. Okay, so if I go here, and let me just go back to this example that we were seeing before, and actually I might just go here and let's just leave it like that. And maybe if I scroll here, Okay, so for those that are familiar with Musco, so Musco is just a way in which we prioritize in JIRA. And the M stands for musts. The O here doesn't stand for anything, so forget about it. It's just because I wanted to give it a cool name. The S stands for shoulds. So musts, shoulds, coulds. The O here doesn't stand for anything, and the W stands for won't haves. All right? So these are the top priority things. These are the essential things, the things that we can't live without. These are the things that we just have to do. It's not optional, because if we don't do them, the system breaks, or we're doing something that is illegal, or we're breaking a law, or we're not meeting compliance standards. It's just something that is essential and needs to get done. It needs to get done. All right? There's no option of doing it. You have to. All right? It's kind of your commitment. And then we have the shoulds, right? Which are important, but not essential, right? So it's the next ranking priorities, and then the coulds, less important. Okay, and again, they're not essential, right? So they're less important than the shoulds, but if we did them, great. You know, it's like a nice to have. So this is a bit like a nice to have. All right. And then the won't haves, they are just things that we're not doing. So we're not doing them. Not doing them. All right. So basically things that we've declared are outside of scope. And this is just a concept and something that we use in Agile to prioritize user stories. So I'm just going to jump back to the example. I just wanted to come back real quickly here just to show this to you and to explain a little bit the must-have, the must-go concept in case you ever hear about it. So this is what it stands for. Must-go is for must, shoulds, coulds, and won't haves. All right? And that's something that we are using in this project, and that's why I wanted to quickly explain it. If I go back here, we've actually added to our user stories that category, whether it's a should. This one, for example, is a subtask, and that's why it says here minor. But if we go here, it's a must. So this red arrow indicates should. This other red arrow, which is a little bit different, indicates a must. So like I said before, if you're ever in doubt about what something means in JIRA, just hover the mouse over it without clicking on it, and it will tell you. This thing here is just the unique ID that JIRA gives to the user story. So ST is an abbreviation for this project. ST stands for short for stash, which is the name of the project. And then 552 is the unique ID of this user story. So it's user story ST-552 or 552, whatever you want to call it. All right. And then here,